On behalf of Brian and myself, I'm honored to acknowledge that we are currently recording on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. CFS Counseling and Wellbeing and United Way Simcoe Muskoka respect Indigenous history and culture and are dedicated to moving forward in the process of reconciliation with all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people.
Welcome to Resilience Rising, the show that shatters poverty myths, sparks optimism, and fuels innovative change through community-inspired discussions.
I'm Amanda Fellows, Community Programs Manager at CFS Counseling and Wellbeing.
And I'm Brian Shelley, the Chief Executive and Philanthropy Officer at United Way Simcoe Muskoka.
The title of today's episode is Safety and Empowerment, Supporting Survivors of Domestic Abuse. The Ontario Association of Interval and Transitional Houses has a vision for a province that is safe, equitable, and just for all women, girls, and gender-diverse communities. It works towards ending all gender-based violence and oppression through advocacy, education, research, and training. The association works in support of community-based agencies providing shelter and support to women and children seeking safety and a fresh start. To shine a light on the harsh realities of domestic abuse and the invaluable frontline work being done to support survivors, we welcome today's guest, Sophie Grogan, the child and youth worker at My Friend's House Crisis Center in Collingwood. Thanks for joining us today, Sophie.
Thank you.
So My Friend's House opened in 1991 and serves the Georgian Triangle, so from Wasaga to Collingwood, Creamwater, Meaford, and all parts in between. Could you share how long you've worked there and what path brought you to the role that you're in currently?
Yeah, for sure. So I started at My Friend's House about 3 years ago. I came on as a crisis intervention counselor, and that was my entry into this world of this field of social work, which really working with such vulnerable populations. And then I came into this role as a child and youth worker when it opened up, and I've been in it for just over a year now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing the work you do. Can you maybe tell us about all the things that My Friend's House does and kind of how it supports women?
Totally. So we are a shelter, right? So we have 12 beds within our shelter where women and children can stay. That being said, there's a lot more than 12 people within our large Georgian Triangle catchment area that need services. So we do a lot of outreach support. And that looks like a whole variety of things. So there's me, I'm the child and youth worker, so I would work specifically with the children as well as with the mums as they're navigating communication with CAS, as they're navigating, parenting time with their ex-abuser, as they're navigating reestablishing their relationship with their child. It's a very traumatic experience for the family as well, the unit. And then we have, we can start with our VAW intimate partner violence counselor. So her work is one-on-one with women, providing therapeutic, solution-focused counseling around moving forward, essentially. Then we have our transitional and legal support. So transitional housing, right? So finding your housing after your shelter, rebuilding your finances, finding suitable, safe, affordable housing that's sustainable for you and your family. Legal advocacy in terms of, family court, in terms of finding a legal aid lawyer, in terms of being properly advocated for, in terms of following up on police charges and things like that. That's so overwhelming. And it's terrifying because your children are involved in this case as well, not just you. So a lot of support in that too. And then we have our wellness coordinator who works within mental health and addictions, supporting women as they are working through that as well. Yeah. And then, we also have a new role that just came in about, I would say just over a year ago. It's transitional work as well as sexual assault counseling and support. So there's a bit of an advocacy there. So part of it is through the Finding Home project, which we are doing with the United Way. And in terms of finding that transitional housing space for women and families as they're leaving the shelter before they're finding their own home. It takes a lot of time there, and a lot of people are turned away because they're a single mom with 3 children, a landlord doesn't want to rent to them, and all those kinds of barriers, right? Childcare, all that kind of stuff. So that transitional housing piece is huge. And then we've noticed a massive increase in sex trafficking in our area. And so having someone that's the point person on that can help advocate for women and youth that are being trafficked has been really helpful too. Yeah.
12 beds doesn't seem like enough. Like you,
Yeah.
so do you find yourselves, so I'm a woman, I'm fleeing an abusive relationship, like do I have a space there? Like how what does that look like?
Great question. So I think a lot of different interval houses do it differently, but our approach is just on a needs basis. So if we're full, we're full. If we're open and someone calls, first caller based on their need gets it, right? If someone calls after and they seem like they're in need as well, but we've already committed the spot to somebody else, it's their spot, right? Because it's too hard to always quantify. There's no real grounds to turn someone away,
right?
You know, but we do work a lot in terms of trying to find somewhere else that someone can go. We have a development project. We're going to expand. We're really excited about that and offer more units and transitional units as well as shelter beds, which will be huge. We have single women, but then we also have women with children, right? And that's their needs are very different.
Yeah.
And it's very triggering to see children if you're a single woman who, say, doesn't have custody of her own children or, you know, is dealing with mental health and addictions. And children is a very triggering thing for women, right? And so when you're trying to heal, it's a hard environment to be in. So in terms of that, we're looking towards growth, but we don't have it yet. It's a really long process. Yeah.
So this program really does focus on poverty, and so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. You know, if you could touch on how economic insecurity intersects with domestic violence, and what specific challenges does this create for survivors trying to leave an abusive situation?
Yeah, good question. So there's so many different parts to this, right? I think it's important to note that domestic violence affects everybody across the board, regardless of your income, regardless of your quality of life. But your socioeconomic status, there is an impact there. You're more vulnerable sometimes, right? And that can just look at, say, your income, right? So maybe you don't have childcare, right? So you're not working. So your income as a mom is your child tax benefit. Maybe you have some OW or something like that, but that's probably it. And that doesn't even pay for rent for a 2-bedroom home, right? Let alone the grocery costs, the housing, like the bills, the utilities, right? Let alone your kids run through clothes every 3 months, right? And you need diapers and you need wipes, and that's so expensive. You need formula, you need different foods, right? So that piece is really challenging. Like the cost of living for a single mom, I think is the biggest piece. Then the other thing is how debilitating domestic violence can be on your quality of life. So let's say, for example, we've got someone who's earning $150K a year, right? Dual income home, they've got 3 kids, he's abusive. If the job is too hard to maintain while you're managing your mental health of the toxic abuse, your quality of life is diminishing, right? Your ability to perform in your job is lessening. Maybe you quit, maybe you're told to quit, right? There's a lot of different things there that happen. You lose your employment, essentially. That happens a lot. And then being able to maintain your home and shelter for your children is really becomes dependent on that abusive partner. And that's a thing that we find a lot. The second thing that has been huge for us as a barrier is financial abuse. So whether that means your name is being put down in liens and mortgages and things like that you don't know about, and you don't find out until you're in the divorce process, right? Or maybe you do find out when you're trying to leave and then you realize that you actually have zero money, right? Or Also, your name can just be used in places that you don't know, right? And there's credit cards taken out on your name and things like that. That is happening so much. And then the debt that you have as well, separate to your partner, is huge. I think when you look at poverty in general, we're looking at privilege, right? And people get kind of triggered by that word sometimes. But privilege doesn't mean like that what people have they haven't earned, right? Privilege means that you haven't had the same opportunities that other people have had. And those opportunities haven't been given to you. So growing up in a two-parent home with parents that communicate in a healthy way to each other, that are making enough money to pay their bills, right? That can fix their car when it's broken, that can go out and buy you a birthday present for your birthday, right? That's privilege in our world. And a lot of people don't always realize that, right? And then say you grow up in a two-parent home that's toxic, and then all of a sudden it's two single-parent homes, and mom's car breaks down and she can't fix it, right? And you see mom crying at the kitchen table, or you hear her crying in the shower, right? And then you go to dad's and all you hear about is negative things about your other parent, or vice versa, right? That creates a lot of uncertainty in a child. And then as that child grows, their ability to cope with stress, good stress, bad stress, managing things, make critical decisions, things like that, that can be inhibited too. And it becomes this intergenerational cycle where mental health, addictions, poverty, they're so intersected. And yeah, the vulnerable people are the ones that are affected the most. And in domestic violence, women and children are very, very vulnerable.
In preparation for this episode, and I'll read it just because I want to make sure whenever we're sharing stats that I'm sharing accurate stats, but it was that 38% of domestic or victims of domestic violence become homeless, and that 90% of women experiencing homelessness are victims of abuse. Those numbers are jarring.
Yeah.
Like really, really jarring. And we were discussing before, I don't believe that anyone believes that abuse is okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a baseline understanding that we all have. I don't know that we all understand or appreciate the economic impact of fleeing a violent household.
Yeah.
Because the fact that 90% of women experiencing homelessness are victims of violence or sexual assault is just like that's.
It's chilling.
It's really, really chilling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so many combining factors as to why, right? But a lot of our society has this attitude of homelessness, of it's a choice, or, get up off your ass kind of thing, right? Yeah. And when we look at homelessness and domestic violence, like the window I have is very different as to why women and children are homeless, right? And why young men and adults are homeless too, right? It's this cycle of, I was speaking with a colleague recently actually, and we were just talking about how damaging it is to not have a safety net. And a safety net being that privilege, right? That community of people that you can lean on. Hey, my car's broken down, I can't afford to go get it fixed. Like, can your brother, the mechanic, look at it, right? And say it's just like changing the battery, or, fixing the brakes, changing your tires. Those bills add up. And then when you look at that safety net of like, okay, I'm not safe in my home anymore. I can stay on my friends' couches for a couple days and then I have nowhere else to go, right? All of a sudden you're homeless. I have the luck that I can call my family, I can call my friends, I can call, all these places, but that's a lot of people that are calling us, that they're just like, I have no one else. And that safety net of finances, financial literacy, right? That's huge. That's huge. Independent living skills, right? Being connected to counseling services before you're homeless, right? Being connected to counseling service after you've survived a trauma, so that you can set yourself up for success. Those sorts of, there's just all these minute little pieces of the barriers that add up to what women face. And when women are homeless, they need safety, they need structure, they need shelter, right? And they do not have the same ability to defend themselves always, right? They are very vulnerable. I'm wondering, like, I'm curious what the stat is on, you know, homeless women and sexual assault.
I'm sure.
Right?
Yeah, and I
Like,
think
I
that
would
was
say
in that 90%. It was
in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was that 90% of women experiencing homelessness are victims of either violence or sexual assault. So it's
Yeah.
part and parcel. But
Yeah.
violence is violence.
Violence
right?
is violence.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's just that vulnerability and how people use women's bodies as a product, and that's what that really is, right? And they're being used as a product to fulfill whoever needs to be fulfilled, but as a result, they're homeless, they're experiencing violence, they're experiencing sexual assault, and their ability to stabilize it's possible, but it is really, really hard, right? It is really, really hard because your mental health is severely affected by the trauma of being homeless, right? Your mental health is severely affected by the trauma of the domestic violence you've experienced. And sometimes those two, maintaining your housing is really hard,
Yeah.
right? Maintaining your stay in a shelter can be really hard.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the privilege piece because I feel like I have a bunch of thoughts. One, we talked a lot about in the last episode with Will about, you know, kind of the pillars of violence and how they happen, and objectification is one of those pillars, power and control, all those pieces you're speaking to, which I think is really important for people to hear. Like those pillars are important for people to hear and understand. The other piece about privilege I think that's important to note is that people's opinions on things like homelessness is often influenced by their privilege, which is why we have all of these misconceptions and all of these judgments about homelessness. We could have a whole episode just on that.
Totally.
But, you know, along those lines then, what are the misconceptions about domestic abuse, right? Like what are, you know, how does that privilege oftentimes form judgments or misconceptions about women and domestic
And we get
violence?
this a lot, right? Because we are like over 50% donor fundraised, right? And so we often have to explain these rearrange people's perception of this, and also, you know, mitigate some stigma around it. Domestic violence, most people that hear about an instance of like their sister or their friend's friend, or, well, why didn't she leave? Right? I think that's kind of the thought that runs through a lot of people's mind, and people vocalize it too, you know?
Yeah. Oh, and you see it on social media all the time with celebrities who are and I know this is it's not about celebrities, but
it's the same thing.
We see it, right? It's like, well, she's saying this now, but she stayed there for 5 years.
Yeah.
If it was that bad, why didn't she report it?
Yeah.
Right?
And I would say the biggest stigma is that, oh, she's choosing to stay, right?
Yeah.
And it takes women an average of 7 times to leave an abuser before they leave finally. And
you should say that again. Just say that again so everybody
it takes
can
women an
hear it.
average of 7 times
Yeah.
to leave an abuser before they leave, for real.
It's wild.
And there's a culminating arrangement of factors, but an abusive relationship is often quite toxic, right? So to the core, people feel that they need the other person, that they need their validation, right? And that's on both sides. Then there's a lot of love bombing, of violence, and then, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm going to do better, I love you, you're the best thing that ever happened to me, I would never do that to you again, I don't know what came over me, I really need to deal with my problems.
Love bombing.
Right?
I've never heard that term.
Love bombing. Yeah. And then the woman may return, right? Because this is the person that she is in love with. Like, you still love somebody that's being violent towards you. It takes you a really long time to figure that out and you know, find the line between this is the person I love and this is the person that's doing this, and oh my gosh, they're actually the same person, right? That takes a long time. It's a really hard thing for any human to do.
And that's trauma.
That's
right?
trauma.
Like, I think that's the thing that people forget, is that is a trauma response, right? You know, you don't, whether you're a child experiencing violence, whenever somebody who is in, you know, a position in your life where you love or respect or whatever, we don't just instantaneously, you know, they don't hit you and you think, oh, okay, I don't love them anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think people need to wrap their heads around that component too, that people are experiencing trauma, nothing happens like that.
Yeah, it takes time. And then maybe after the second or third time, right, you're starting to realize that you want to get out. Like, you really want to get out. You know you want to get out, right? Then you're faced with all these barriers of the housing crisis. Oh, like I can't afford a $3,000 2-bedroom home for my kids, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, because that's really what it is. When you add up all the utilities and everything, you're looking at $3,000.
Yeah.
Well, and, so I'll give a shout out to another community collaborative project that United Way has funded, the furniture bank that Redwood Park heads up, right?
Fresh Start.
That was something that came up a lot, and something that people didn't really understand that when you talk about the importance of a furniture bank, right? So if you've fled a violent household with your kids, how many nights of eating on milk crates and sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and with your children, how long before that gets to be maybe I'll go back.
Yeah.
Right? And so that was something for me that was a real eye-opener when we were talking to Redwood about the launch of the furniture bank. And it's not just about upcycling and reusing furniture. It's actually a tool that helps people stay away from that abusive situation, because it helps to build a home.
Yeah.
Well, it's about access. Like, coming back to this conversation about privilege, privilege is about access.
Yes.
I can access
resources. Yeah.
And so that becomes an accessibility point for people. Like, I can access this to create a life for myself, that feels good, as opposed to eating off of milk crates in my,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We use Furniture Bank every single time we rehome a family.
Yeah.
And without it, it would be so hard. And that comes down to the next piece of leaving, which is like the grief process, right? When a relationship ends or is ending, you're grieving.
Right.
And a lot of people don't give themselves credit for that and acknowledge that it's happening, but it's the reality, right? And there's a grief process of you're losing somebody, but you're also losing the dream of this family you built together, or this family you were going to build together, and the home.
And Hollywood doesn't help with that, right? Like the Hollywood story is like, I'm out of here and screw him and I'm free, right? Very rarely do you actually see that other side of it, and grieving and loss. Like you committed to a life with this person potentially, and it's disintegrating. It's not safe.
Well, and I think we minimize the experience of grief in that process too, because of that, and because it's like this, you did a good thing for yourself, so just go. Like, you don't, and we almost dismiss that grieving process because it was bad, so we shouldn't grieve it. We should just get on with ourselves, which I think we do a real disservice to women in that process of minimizing that.
And then you start to have this internal dialogue of like, okay, I still want to go back to this person. Like, I still love this person. I want to go see them. But everyone's telling me this person's treating me so badly, and I know they're treating me badly. Is this what I deserve? Like, do I deserve this type of treatment? Maybe this is where I'm going. Right? And they go back, right? And it's that sense of self-worth starts to really disintegrate. Obviously, the abuser has a great, it's just supportive for the abuser, because they're feeding that low self-worth all the time. And the other thing that they're feeding is isolation. So you become so isolated, you turn away a lot of your family, a lot of your friends, right? They don't want to maybe be a part of your relationship and don't want to support it, or your abuser's telling you negative things about them, and you spin arguments and things like that, and you become so isolated. That is like the power of the abuser, really. And then when you leave, you're so lonely. Right? And that's the only person that you have that's some sort of comfort sometimes, right? And it's this dream of the person, but still, right? And that loneliness, coinciding with the homelessness, right, or the low income, right? You need to get a job again because he didn't allow you to work, and you need to find your resume and brush up your resume, and then getting a job is so hard, and then you're really triggered by slamming doors in loud places, and it's just this building cycle.
And possibly caring for children that may have also been victims of abuse.
And when children see their mums be abused, right, that verbal, psychological abuse, they start to embody it as well, right? It's their trauma response, it's their learned behavior. They are extremely traumatized, but they know that that's how you talk to mom. Right? And so then rebuilding that relationship, mom finding her voice as a parent and rebuilding that with her child and her children, so challenging. How
does the shelter support with those longer term outcomes, right? Because you're talking about, so, I mean, I think most people know that women and children's shelters do things in the immediate sense, right? We get people out of a violent situation, we help them address their basic needs, like whatever that is. But then all of these long-term pieces you're talking about, how does the shelter kind of continue its support of those long-term outcomes?
So oftentimes families that come to stay with us, like it's so complex in restabilizing, they have a longer stay, right? And it's supported, and we're supporting them in finding housing and things like that. But if it's completely dysregulated within their family unit, it takes more than a week to figure that out, right? Yeah. And so that whole process takes time. And then that's when we lean on services like finding home or, transitional housing and things like that, and really try to support people. But we work with our outreach clients for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're always able to come back and reconnect with us. Some of our funding from the government only allows us to work with, within 1 year of domestic violence and things like that. But other roles are able to support longer term, and so for the most part, we're able to kind of still give that wraparound holistic support. Yeah.
And you're doing direct service. I'm sure you see. I think what's helpful to know is that there's hope, that there's success.
There is.
So I'm wondering, do you have an example of something, hopeful, a success that you've had with a client, where, what does that look like?
Yeah. And success in this realm is hard to measure, right? What does it really mean? Because it's such a long process that it can take people years to really find their footing again, and rebuilding their financial stability to be able to not be around those people is huge too, right? But for example, maybe over a couple years ago, we had this client, and she arrived with her 2 children, and one of them was actually nonverbal from the trauma. And throughout the course of her stay, she was able to find sobriety and maintain it, which was huge, right? They had been living in a very confined space controlled by the abuser. And so oftentimes abusers use opioids and drugs to kind of manipulate the situation. And so she'd been a victim of that. But she was able to, really, really overcome her addiction, which was amazing. We have a harm reduction model within our practice, so we support, slow, integrated, supportive addiction, and essentially building people up to that healthy stage where they can have a high functioning mental health, and then be able to make those decisions for themselves. But black and white sobriety is not a very easy thing to do for anybody, right? And so, especially when you got kids involved and all that, right? Yeah. So, so she connected to so many different counseling services that we had, and really engaged in her supports, really engaged in reconnecting with her children and rebuilding their relationships, and finding the proper nutritional values for them, and everything that she was struggling to provide for because she was so overwhelmed and so traumatized. And she found housing for them, and engaged in connected to so many services in their new community, and the kids were just thriving, and she's doing really well. And she is a success story, and sometimes, as direct service providers and people that hear about this or see their family member dealing with this, it's like, oh my gosh, there's no hope, right?
Especially that stat you gave before of it takes 7 times,
yeah.
right? And someone may leave a community, or you may not be in contact for that 7th time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then there's also the fatigue of the supporter, right?
Sure.
Of the people that are supporting you, they can get fatigued too, and that's something that people shouldn't judge themselves for, right? Let it go and try again and do the best that you can do, because it is really, really challenging. Yeah.
Sophie, if you could leave us with just one thought, if there's one perspective that you'd like to change of people's minds when they think about whether it's the intersectionality between poverty and abuse, or just a perspective in general around the realities and the trauma of those escaping or experiencing domestic violence, what would be that one thing if you could take a magic wand and change people's minds, what would it be?
I think, I'm a child and youth worker, so I think of the kids that are affected in these instances, and I think not labeling, not giving up on someone, not labeling a child as, so traumatized, so dysregulated that they have no success chance of building themselves up to someone who, can build healthy relationships with people and support people. But I think a lot of people see youth and children, especially young boys and males, and see that abusive behavior, see that toxic masculinity, and they're just like, oh gosh, he's just like his dad. And it's not fair to give up on those kids because they have so much potential, and they are really, really just traumatized, hurting little boys.
We thank today's special guest, Sophie Grogan, the child and youth worker at My Friend's House Crisis Center in Collingwood, for joining us today. Thanks also to our studio partners at Rogers TV in Barrie, and of course to you, our viewers and or our listeners, for joining us. In addition to being available on Rogers TV, the video version of Resilience Rising is also available on our YouTube channels, and the audio format is available wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
We'll see you next time on episode 4 of season 2, when we discuss unmasking racial disparities, poverty, and BIPOC communities. I'm Amanda Fellows of CFS Counseling and Wellbeing, with my co-host Brian Shelley of United Way Simcoe Muskoka, asking you to embrace innovative change to ensure our communities are great places to live for everyone. Thanks for tuning in.